Okay, now we're going to talk about torts against property. We talked about torts against individual people and torts against businesses, but there are also torts against property. And the first one is trespass to land. If you trespass on someone else's land and you do some damage to the land while you're there, you can be sued for the damage that you do to the land. This is a two-sided sword, though. If someone comes on your land and even though they're a trespasser, you have a duty to keep your land free of hazards. And if someone gets hurt on your property, even though they're there as a trespasser, they may be able to sue you if you've been really negligent in the way you manage the property. Another note an important note about trespass to land, it has to do with things like swimming pools. There's a concept in the law called attractive nuisance. So if you're the only house in the neighborhood that has a swimming pool and it's been 105 degrees for the last week and the kids are hanging on your fence, even if you've got a nice big fence around the pool like you're supposed to have, if the neighbor kids climb over the fence and get into your pool and one of them drowns in there, you may actually have liability for the death of that child, even though you had a good fence around the pool and all that, because there's a concept in the law called attractive nuisance. It's kind of a Pied Piper theory. If you've got something on your property that draws kids or other people that are vulnerable to injury, and they are attracted by whatever it is on your property, that's the attractive nuisance, you may have liability to them even though they were trespassers. What can you do about that? If you've got a pool and you've got a good big fence around it, about the only other thing you can do is watch your pool very carefully and have good liability insurance. So there can be trespass to land. One other note about trespass to land before we go on to trespass to personal property. In California, when you are cutting trees, even if you're just cutting ornamental trees in your yard, be very careful, because if you go over the boundary line and you cut trees on someone else's property, regardless of whether you're harvesting timber on acreage or you're just cutting down a fruit tree in the backyard, if you cut down someone else's tree in California, whatever the damages are for cutting down that tree, so if you're harvesting timber, it's the value of the timber. But if you're cutting down a tree in your backyard, that tree may be worth thousands of dollars in terms of landscaping value, and they'll have an expert witness that comes and puts a value on that tree. Whatever the damages are that you caused by cutting down someone else's tree or trees, that damage is tripled in California under a special statute called timber trespass law. So be careful about cutting down trees on someone else's property. Now, you know about trespass to land, but there can also be trespass to personal property. So how does that work? Well, suppose you're out in your front yard mowing the yard and you see your next door neighbor and he's got one of those fancy electric edge trimmers and he's edging along the sidewalk with it, and he gets a phone call, so he goes in the house and he leaves the edger laying there. And you say, wow, I always wanted to try one of those. And so you go over and I don't think Joe will mind, so you go over and you take Joe's edger without his permission and you try it out on your sidewalk, but you hit a rock and you break it. Well, that's trespass to personal property. You took the personal property without permission. You weren't intending to steal it, you were going to give it back, but you took it without permission, and sure enough it got damaged, and so now you owe Joe damages for trespass to personal property. Another tort related to property, which is incredibly important if you're involved in owning a business, is the tort of conversion. And under conversion, in order to be guilty of a theft and to be a thief, you have to take property without the other person's permission. So you go and you steal a hubcap off of Joe's car without his permission. That's theft. But conversion is when you get the possession of the property from somebody else with their permission, but then once you have the property, you decide to keep it. You convert it to your own ownership. That's the tort and the crime of conversion. So instead of going over and basically taking Joe's edger without his permission, you see him out there using it, and you say, "Hey Joe, I always wanted to try one of those edgers. Can I borrow yours and try it?" And Joe says, "Sure. Take it and just bring it back when you're done." And so Joe gives you the edger to use, expecting that you'll give it back. But after you use it, you say, "Man, this is so great, I'm keeping it." And you put it in your garage, and you intend to keep the edger. You're not giving it back to Joe. Well, in that moment, you have committed, that's the word, you have committed the tort and the crime of conversion. You've converted the property to your own use. So why is that such a big deal when you're a business owner? Because one of the most common forms of the tort and the crime of conversion is embezzlement. And the classic scenario with a business of embezzlement is you are the business owner and you're working very long hours, 10, 15 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, and just doing the best you can to keep up with everything that you have to get done to operate a business. And eventually you have a trusted second person. You trust them with your life. They're so great. It's a Wonder Woman that runs the office for you, and she pays all the bills for you, and once or twice a month she types up or prints out all of the checks that have to be paid for all of the suppliers and the rent and the utilities and maybe the employee paychecks. She writes all those checks up, and she's so trustworthy that every month you just sign all the checks and she mails them out for you. She's great. But the problem is you never double check her work. And what you don't know is that she has a husband that has a drug problem, or she has a child that's terribly ill and has to have a surgery that she can't afford, or she has a gambling problem and she's being threatened over not payment of her gambling debts. She has some kind of financial problem you don't know about, and she's desperate for money. If she doesn't get the money, something horrible is going to happen. And so one month she writes one more expense check that's not real, it's an imaginary expense, and she says, "I'll just do this once, I'll take the extra $1,000 and I'll pay my gambling debt or my husband's drug debt, and then I'll pay it back next month and he'll never know it was gone." And maybe she does that once or twice and gets away with it. Maybe she writes a check and takes the money and bails herself out, and then she secretly pays it back and you never know it was gone. But maybe after that she gets into a whole series of problems and she's writing a check every month, two or three checks, and one morning you wake up and you know something's wrong with the books because there's $40,000 or $50,000 missing and you can't figure out where it went. And then you find out your trusted number one secretarial person or admin person in the office has embezzled $40,000 or $50,000 from your business. And now it's a disaster. You may have to have her arrested and put in jail. Many times the people are so embarrassed that they let this happen to their business. They don't want the public to know, and so they don't ever have the person arrested. They make some kind of deal with them that if they'll pay back the money over time, they'll be fired, but they won't be charged criminally. You never get that money back. And your heart is broken because one of your best employees that you thought was like family betrayed you, but they only did it out of desperation. Most of those people are not evil, they're just desperate. And one of the big tragedies that I've seen as a lawyer, when business owners come in again and again and again and they have this kind of betrayal going on, they look at you sadly and they say, "The saddest part of all of this is if she just would have come to me and told me what was going on in her life, I would have given her the money." So people don't ask. They get desperate and they're ashamed and they don't ask, and they end up engaging in embezzlement. But what you have a responsibility to do as a business owner is trust but verify. Trust but verify. No matter how trustworthy and wonderful this person is who's writing those checks for you and keeping your books for you, you have a responsibility to audit those books frequently. And so you know exactly whether or not any money is missing, and so you keep the honest people honest, and she doesn't ever dare to steal money from you by embezzlement. Okay, that's enough on conversion and embezzlement. We already talked about trade libel, where someone slanders your product. There is also a different kind of slander of property, and that is slander of title to real estate. When you sell a piece of real estate, usually you have to produce clear title, which means all liens, all old tax liens, all old mortgages have to be cleared. They have to be paid off out of the money you get from the sale, so the new owner gets a clear title to the property. Well, a problem that comes up when people get into some kind of dispute with you and they think that you owe them money, and they might go down without doing it the right way, without first getting a court judgment or properly doing the paperwork to record a mechanic's lien against your property. They go down and record an improper lien against your property. Well, when you go to sell the property, if there's a delay that's caused by the improper lien that a person put on your real estate, and you lose the deal, you lose money because someone put a lien on your property that was not legal, you can sue them for slander of title to real property, and you can recover the damages from them for slander of title to real estate. That's pretty much it on torts, except for cyber torts. I'm going to throw them in here at the last minute. If someone defames you online, it's the same as defamation anywhere else. You can sue them for defamation. We have a problem with spam and all the junk emails you get. It was worse when they were doing it on fax machines. We have an anti-spam law that people are supposed to refrain from doing that if you tell them not to. And in fact, there's a federal law where on your fax machine, if you keep getting bombarded with those junk faxes after you tell them not to do that, you can actually get them to be fined or have a civil penalty of $10,000. But that's pretty much it on cyber torts, and that concludes our discussion on intentional torts. In our next section, the next module will be on negligence torts and strict liability torts.